My name is Harold Johnson, and I grew up just a little ways south of here, in the community of Malinosa. My parents were trappers and fishers, and because I knew the stories of trapping and fishing, and everyone in my community was trappers and fishers, I believed I could be a trapper and a fisherman. A man from my community had been to Cyprus and Egypt as part of the peacekeeping force. He came back and told me stories. At the age of 17, I joined the Canadian Navy because of those stories. I served with the Canadian Navy, and when I got out, I heard stories from my older brothers about logging and mining. So I decided I can do that. I went logging and mining across North and Western Canada. The stories that I told myself about being a sailor, a logger, and a miner are common stories about hard work, drinking hard, raising hell, being rowdy, mean, tough buggers. I met a woman, I got married, had children. My story changed. I was now the hard-working provider, protector. It was just a story that I told myself. It was a story that I created from all of the stories around me, and I told myself, and I believed it was true. I believed that I was a hard-working, hard-drinking, rowdy, tough person, and lived it. That was my life. Working at the Key Lake uranium mine in 1991, I decided to quit and go to university. And in university, I was still the hardworking student, and I had to cut back on my drinking because I wanted to prove that I was as smart as everybody there, including the professors. When you're an Indian and you get a bachelor's degree, some people tend to say they just gave you that because you're an Indian. So to prove nobody gave me anything, I went to Harvard and got a master's degree. When I was in the Navy and logging and mining, I drank rum because that was the story. Sailors drink rum. When I was a university student and my early career as a lawyer, I drank scotch, 12-year-old single malt, because that was the stories that I'd heard that successful people drank that particular kind of whiskey. But everything is story. I am story, the universe is story. When you go out at night and you look up at the stars, you are not seeing the stars where they are. All the light from those stars has traveled for millions of miles, and all you're seeing is the history of the universe written in light. Canada doesn't exist other than the story that we tell about it. The 49th parallel isn't there. You can drive down, have a look. There is no line. We created it. We made it up. We made up our personality. As Canadians, we say that this is who we are. This is how we are. But we made it up. Our constitution that defines Canada is just something that we made up. We can change it at any time. Canada is the story that we live. Corporations like Cameco or Monsanto don't exist. We give them their reality. We make them real because of the stories we tell about them. If Cameco or Monsanto exist anywhere, they're in a drawer at corporations branch, and it's just the constitution or the charter of the corporation that's filed away. We give these entities their power. There is a very powerful story out there that demands human sacrifice. It's called the economy story. We're so afraid of something happening to our economy that we demand human sacrifice for it. We used to believe in dragons and unicorns. Now we believe in this mystical thing called an economy. And we know that there are people starving to death in other parts of the world, and that we have way too much food here. But if we gave some of our food to those people who are starving, the economy would suffer. So people have to die for our economy. I am story, my physical being. I am made of DNA. It's a 4-letter alphabet, A, C, T, and G. With that 4-letter alphabet, I write every living thing on the planet. Our relatives, the Iroquois, have a story that the Creator put our original instructions inside of us. I understand that. He wrote our original instructions in DNA. It tells me how I'm going to be, what my eye color is, how long my hair is going to be, whether I might get cancer or heart disease. But it's just a story. It was written, and I carry it. Everything on the planet is story. In in science, we're looking at photons, light, trying to decide what that was. Is it a photon, a discrete packet of energy, or is it a wave? And we discovered when we looked at it to see if it was a photon, it would be a photon. If we looked at it to see if it would be a wave, it would be a wave. Science came up with the observer effect, and it freaked them out. Einstein famously said that reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. We discovered that things become what we are looking for. About a year ago, little less than a year ago, they did a similar experiment with atoms. Atoms are much bigger than light photons, and they cooled atoms down to near absolute zero, and using a computer tested them. And if the computer said, atom, this time you are going to be solid, the atom was solid. If the computer said, okay, atom, this time you're going to be a wave, the atom was a wave. They did millions of tests. Atoms will become whatever story we tell about them. We know that the atoms in my hand, or that my hand is made mostly of empty space. The atoms are very small and very far apart. As with the atoms in this table, I should be able to take my hand and push it right through this table, because the atoms in my hand are so far apart and the atoms in the table are so far apart that they shouldn't touch each other. The only thing that prevents me from doing that is story. Now you might be saying, Harold, you're a little silly. If you bang your head against that table, it's going to hurt. My response to you is, it is still story. This is just evidence of how powerful stories are. There are other very powerful stories. Placebo. If I give you a sugar pill and tell you that this pill is powerful medicine and it's going to heal you, your symptoms will diminish and you might even be cured, not by the sugar in the pill, but by the story that I told you. There's an opposite effect. It's called a nocebo effect. If I give you the same sugar pill and tell you that this is poison and it might kill you, and if you take it and you've heard my story, you're probably going to get very sick and you might even die. That's how powerful stories are. There's a story that's been going around, and I'm sure you've heard it. It's called the lazy, dirty, drunken Indian story. It's been told about us since the settler peoples first got here. It's written into the history books. The story is still being told, although it's modified a little bit, but we're still hearing bits and pieces of it in the media. I had a young person about a year and a half ago tell me that to be a real Indian, you have to drink. We've internalized the story. We've heard it so much. We've heard it in residential schools. We've heard it all of our life. We've believed that story, and we've internalized it. We believe that to be real Indians, we have to drink. If we imagine our traditional societies, how we lived before, we were people on the move. We were hunter-gatherers. And if we used up all of the resources in one area, we moved on to another. When we decided where to go, we sent out scouts to look over the land, and they'd come back and report. To the west, there's berries. To the north, there's buffalo. To the east, there's wild turnips. And to the south, there's been a huge fire and there's nothing there. And they'd report back to the people, and the chief would talk to the people. He'd talk to the headmen, to the thinkers, to the lead woman in the community, and make a decision. And maybe he decides, first we'll go pick the berries because they're fresh right now and ripe, and then we'll go get the turnips, and by then the buffalo will be fatter, and then we'll get the buffalo. In modern society, we're still moving. We're changing all the time. We're evolving. We're becoming. Society changes. But our leaders aren't leading anymore. Our leaders tend to look at what the polls say, that the direction the people are going in, and then the politicians run out front of the people and pretend that they're leading. Our thinkers, our academics, and our scientists have stopped talking to us. They speak in a language that only they understand, and sometimes a scientist from one area can't speak to a scientist from another area because the languages are so complex. They just speak to each other and they've stopped speaking to the people. The scouts in this modern society are the artists. We imagine the future. We go out and imagine what is beyond society, and we bring it back and report it. So George Orwell predicted 1984, said Big Brother would be watching, would be living in a technical surveillance society. And it never happened because he predicted it. Whenever government starts to get close to looking at us too closely, we all say, we remember what George Orwell said, and we remember Big Brother, and we're not going there. It's though George Orwell predicted that, or said that to the south it's all burnt, don't go that way. So the scouts go out and come back and tell us what they've seen. If all the scouts bring back are stories of violence and pornography, we can't complain if we live in a violent and pornographic society. So what do we do to change the story? White people can't talk about it. White person can't say Indians and alcohol in the same sentence because they'll be pointed at and be accused of being racist. Aboriginal people can't talk about Indians and alcohol in the same sentence because if they do, they're afraid that other people are going to point at them and say, see, it's true. You are lazy, dirty, drunken Indians. So how do we create change? What do we do to change the story that we tell ourselves? We have a story in our culture about kills the enemy. Now, killing the enemy isn't attacking and killing the person who is the enemy. Kills the enemy is about killing the enemy that's between us. We kill that thing that is damaging our relationship. That's what our warriors were trained to do. We change the story by recognizing the story that we're told is a lie. That it was created, it was made up, we made it up, and we can change it. We can change the story anytime that we want. We can start telling sober stories. According to the 2011 Health Indicators Report, the leading cause of death in this territory is injury. So that's car accidents, skidoo accidents, drowning, stabbing, shootings, beatings, house fires, suicide, freezing to death. And we know that that's primarily alcohol. The second leading cause of death is heart disease. And all those guys my age who didn't shut it down, who continued to binge drink, are now falling over dead of heart attacks. The third leading cause of death at 22% is cancer. And we know that alcohol causes brain, liver, kidney, throat, colon, stomach, pancreatitis, all of those cancers. Add alcohol and diabetes. Add children who don't get proper nutrition when they're young because their parents were drinking and have shortened life expectancies as a result. Add to that the people who tend to drink lots, don't exercise or eat properly and have shortened life expectancies as a result. Add to that alcohol attacks all of the organs, not just the brain and the liver, it attacks kidneys, everything else as well. I am estimating right now in northern Saskatchewan, the death rate from alcohol is 1 in 2. Every second person in this territory is going to die an alcohol-related death, whether they drink or not. In any other situation, we'd call that a crime against humanity. If the death rate in northern Saskatchewan from alcohol is 1 in 2, then we can infer that half the costs of health care are the result of alcohol. The provincial government takes in a tax on the sale of alcohol at about 10%. That amount that they take in is equal to 2% of health care. 95% of the people who come to court in the provincial court system were intoxicated at the time they committed their offense. Therefore, 95% of the costs of justice are alcohol related. Those costs include judges' salaries, lawyers' salaries, prisons, prison guards, clerks, everyone associated with justice. The RCMP tell me that 75% of a policeman's job is babysitting drunks. So 75% of the police budget is directly related to alcohol. The cost of everything in this territory is increased because of the cost of alcohol. To build a building like this, a contractor would have factored in the fact that people weren't going to show up for work, that people were going to show up for work hungover, and he'd have lower productivity out of them. And he factored that in when he put in his bid to build this hospital, whether he thought about it or not. The costs of alcohol touch everything that we do. When you pay GST or PST, you know that a big portion of what you are paying in tax is going to subsidize the damaging effects of alcohol in our society. In 1875, Canada sent surveyors across the prairie putting in telegraph lines. The surveyors were met by the Cree, who told them to get off our land and not to come back until we had a treaty. The Cree were the most powerful military force at the time. Canada couldn't do anything. Canada sent a missionary to talk to the Cree to see what the problem was, a missionary named MacDougall. MacDougall traveled around and talked to the chiefs and head people of the Cree Nation. And we sent a message back to the Treaty Commissioner with MacDougall saying, we want a treaty. And one of the things that we demanded in the treaty was a ban on alcohol. We said, when we see it, we drink it, and it destroys us. When we don't see it, we don't think about it. 1876, we come to negotiate Treaty Number 6 at Forts Carleton and Fort Pitt. Commissioner Morris talks for 2 days. The Cree go into caucus. They take the interpreter with them. And when they come back from their caucus, they have a written list of demands, because we know the commissioner and his people like things in writing. And on that written list of demands, again, we ask for a ban on alcohol. It was written into Treaty 6 that the Queen's Indian children will be protected from the evil influences of alcohol throughout the tract ceded, and no alcohol will be allowed on reserve. That was in effect up until 1963. So in 1963, or thereabouts, Canada passes the Canadian Bill of Rights. The first case to the Supreme Court to deal with the Canadian Bill of Rights is a case called R versus Dry Bones. Dry Bones was from the Northwest Territories, and he got a $10 fine for drinking, because the way Canada upheld its treaty obligations was to make it illegal for Indians to drink. The Supreme Court decided the case based on the Canadian Bill of Rights. They didn't talk to Aboriginal people. They didn't look at the treaties. They didn't look at the history. They didn't determine how that law came into effect. And they determined that the law was invalid, that Indians have a human right to drink. After 1963, the Indian Act was changed, and Section 85 was added that allows First Nations to pass a ban by law that prohibits the sale, consumption, and use of alcohol on reserve. And it's strictly limited to the provisions of the Indian Act. So we knew that it was a problem, that it's always been a problem. We'd hoped in treaty that we could fix it. Canada doesn't uphold the treaty the way we'd anticipated they would, and then completely back away from the treaty and leave it all up to us. There are some communities in this territory that have banned alcohol on their reserves. Enforcement is a problem. Provincial prosecutors aren't to prosecute those charges. They're federal charges, so federal prosecutors should be responsible. Federal prosecutors prosecute the drug charges of federal acts. But they tend not to, because the fines are only $100. There's no money in it. When we go into the communities, the elders laugh at us when we prosecute banned bylaw infractions, people charged with drinking on reserve, because the fine is $100 and a bootleg bottle of whiskey is $125. We have three models to deal with the alcohol problems in our communities. The oldest model is the enforcement model. It's been around for about 1,000 years. It's called law. Early on in the common law, I'm sure there were people who got drunk and messed up and had to come to court. There's a proverb from the earliest stages of the common law that says, he who kills while drunk, sober will hang. So it's been around for a long time. It's had no success. We frequently have people in court. About 95% of the people who come before the provincial courts were intoxicated at the time they committed their offense. Using jail, probation, conditional sentence orders, ordering them to stop drinking, or forcing them to stop drinking by sending them to jail hasn't worked. The problem is the same or worse than before. I graduated from Harvard about 20 years ago and have been involved primarily with criminal law since then. And in all that time as a private defense lawyer and for the last 8 years as a Crown prosecutor, I haven't met very many people that I would call criminal. Mostly I met people who drank too much, did something stupid, and got caught and appeared before the courts. The second model is the medical model, and it's been around for about 70 years. We now recognize alcoholism as a disease, but the treatment for it has a success rate of between 2 and 6%. So the very best treatment centers, the ones you pay thousands of dollars for, have a 6% success rate. The treatment centers that our people can afford to go to have a success rate of about 2%. And you have to ask yourself, if placebo is 50% successful, perhaps these treatment facilities are creating more harm than good. So the medical model at 2 to 6% has failed us. The Alcoholics Anonymous model has been tested and its success rate is about 8%. So that medical model treating alcoholism as a disease might be making things worse. The third model that says that Aboriginal people drink because of colonization, because of residential school, what I call the victim model, has no success rate at all and is definitely making things worse. It's the nocebo story. If you keep telling us that the reason our lives are all messed up is because of colonization, because of residential school, because of government policy, we can't do anything about that. We can't fix that. We can never fix that, so we're stuck with it. We get stuck in this cycle of believing that we're worthless and useless and that we can't create any change. Do we drink because we're poor, or are we poor because we drink? Do we drink because our communities are messed up, or did we mess up our communities with our drinking? We take people out of our communities and we send them off to treatment centers, and they come back into the same community and they don't make it. They fall back to drinking. And you ask these people, people who have sobered up, what was the hardest part? And they say, I lost all my friends, or I found out who my real friends were. We need places where sober people can come together. We need societies of sober friends. We need warrior societies that create space for people who don't want to drink. We have a treatment facility at Sequatamo Lodge where you can take the whole family, both parents, children, and they all go for treatment at the same time. It has more success rate than the traditional model. But they have to come back into the community again. And if the community is dysfunctional, their chances of success are reduced. We need a model where you can take a whole community and send it off to treatment, or turn our communities into treatment centers. Create healing amongst ourselves, change the story that we tell ourselves, create sober spaces for ourselves. The biggest problem with the medical model and the victim model and the enforcement model, quite often in courts, we order people to go for treatment. We treat the problem as though it was a medical problem, and it's not. I've seen 18, 19-year-olds coming to court who got drunk and committed an atrocity. They haven't drank long enough to be addicted. These aren't alcoholics. These are just people who drank too much and did something really stupid. Related to the victim model is the newest one, the trauma model. And because of the military and people coming back with post-traumatic stress, this is the new buzz. It's because of trauma. Aboriginal people drink because of trauma. And it's true. That is a big part of it. Many times I've been in court and we've had someone on probation or a CSO and they were ordered not to drink, and then they come back to court, they got drunk and they got arrested and they did something silly, and they come back to court and we say, "What happened? You were doing so good." And they say, "My mom died, my grandma died, my sister got killed." And to them it's a complete answer. They were drinking to drown their grief. There was a young man in a northern community. He was 18, 19 years old. He had a girlfriend. And of course, at that age, you have relationship problems. And they'd been drinking. That made the relationship problem a little bit worse. They walked out of the community to a nearby highway, and they were standing on a bridge. And she decided to commit suicide in front of him to show that she was serious. He stayed with the body for 3 hours until the police and ambulance arrived. Of course, he's traumatized. He's having feelings, he's having thoughts, he doesn't know what to do. He goes to an older person, to his aunt, and tells her what he's thinking, what he's feeling. She said, "Go and get drunk and forget about it." So he did. He got drunk and he stayed drunk. And then one morning the police were knocking on the window of his car. He doesn't remember. Sometime during the night he was driving around and he ran over his cousin, killed his cousin, and they found his cousin's DNA under his car. More grief, more trauma. And it's just a cycle of on and on and on. We drink to overcome the trauma of the grief and mess up and create more trauma, more grief. And it's a continuing cycle. If we're going to solve our problems, and we've got lots of them in northern Saskatchewan, and it looks like a huge pile. If we're going to solve our problems, if we take alcohol out of the equation first, that pile of problems is going to shrink by half. In our society, there's a statistic that's rarely mentioned. In Aboriginal communities, there are twice as many people who are completely abstinent than in general society. There are more of us who are completely sober. We have a culture of not preaching. We don't proselytize. We don't go and tell people how to be, what to do. We don't go tell people you have to sober up. But we've got these people who have learned how to live in this modern world without alcohol. We simply ask them to tell their story, to be more vocal about their sobriety.